This is just such a special afternoon, and I was saying to our guest, Steve Kornacki, when I was walking down the stairs, and I thought, Friday afternoon at 3 o'clock before Thanksgiving, who will come? And you all came, so thanks for joining us and making this such a special presentation. We welcome Steve back for his third visit to UMass Lowell campus. Once last December, you can all remember that, he came to try to explain to us what had happened in the 2016 election. Do we know yet? And he gave a great presentation, and he did provide a lot of clarity through the polling that he had done and the results that he had seen and watched. He then came, of course, we were so excited about Steve coming to the campus and knew right away what a great fit he was for the culture of UMass Lowell. He fit in so well, such a generous soul, working with our faculty, working with our students, and so we nominated and he agreed to accept an honorary degree, which he was awarded this past commencement. Now, it is hard to believe it's just been a year, and he's going to revisit and see if he can shed some light on the context of what is happening now. Many of you know that Steve Kornacki grew up locally. He was born just down the road in Groton. He attended Groton Dunstable High School and had his first interaction with our campus as a high school senior, taking his intro to American politics and his first economics class here on campus as a dual enrollment student. He's been a generous supporter of UMass Lowell for many years. Steve is now national political correspondent for NBC News. Prior to that promotion, Steve hosted his own 4 p.m. show on MSNBC, where in the words of MNBC, I think they did put it on, President Phil Griffin, the president said of Steve became one of our breakout stars of the 2016 election. Steve is a regular fill-in host for Hardball with Chris Matthews, All In with Chris Hayes, and The Rachel Maddow Show. He's also a regular contributor to NBC's Today Show. Previous to his television career, Steve was the political editor at Salon Magazine. We're so thrilled to have him back. Please join me in welcoming Steve Kornacki.
Thank you, everybody, for coming out. Thank you for that introduction. The initials can be tough, so just don't say CNN. That's my only, that's my only thing I ask. But it's this is great to be back. As the chancellor said, yes, I am. I'm a local guy originally from Groton, from Mass. So I always take extra pleasure in getting to sort of come back home. And I got into the airport to pick up the rental car. I got to the counter last night, and the agent said, "Hey, I know you from TV." And my head starts to get a little bigger. Oh yeah, I made it. Looks at me and says, "Chris Hayes, right?" Always a good reality check. So, but yeah, thank you. It is, this crowd, Friday afternoon, right before Thanksgiving, full house for this. This is what I've been finding. I think, I'm sure you guys in your own lives have too, for the past year at least, certainly since last year's election. I've never in my life, I've been a political junkie my whole life. I've been working in political journalism for 15 years now. I've never, in that time, seen this much interest in politics, just day to day. I mean, I can remember most of my career, I would go to, family events, social events, friends' weddings, those sorts of things, and, people would ask me what I do, and, I'm in politics, and then, whatever, and I try to talk up some election in New Jersey or something, and they couldn't care less. I mean, now people are coming up to me, and this is all they want to talk about. And it's just fascinating. There's a lot of words people use to describe this time on both sides of the aisle, but above all, I mean, it's just a fascinating time, because it feels to me like, I think the thing, wherever you are politically, I think the thing that's sort of true about politics right now is we're not sure what we know. We're not sure what the rules of politics are anymore. I know certainly for like the sort of the expert class of commentators and pundits and folks like that who are used to sort of playing the authority figures in the world of politics, they had a lot of rules they thought existed. And those rules said Donald Trump could never get close to the Republican nomination in 2015. And those rules, once he got the Republican nomination, said he could never win the presidency. And he did both. And I think it just called into question how many of the rules that we thought applied still apply. How many of them have never applied at all. How many of them just don't apply to Donald Trump. So to me, it's been, in some ways, since the election last year, it has been like living in a constant, real-time political science experiment. We're testing things, we're learning things about who we are as a country, how we respond to politics, what matters, what doesn't matter, what the rules are, what the rules aren't. And I think we're learning things. And so from my standpoint, for what I do, trying to sort of process this stuff, analyze this stuff, talk about this stuff, the challenge for me that I found is to try to approach this with some humility. And acknowledge that on any question right now, my first answer really has to be, I don't know. I have some ideas, and I'm going to share a bunch with you about where things might be going right now, but I guess I'd start by saying, I'm not 100% sure of almost anything right now in politics, but I think I'm collecting information, I'm watching, I'm learning, I'm sort of putting my own hypotheses out there as this goes along, and I'm testing them as it goes along, and I'm learning. And I think over the span of the next couple of years, we'll emerge with some answers, maybe some new answers. So with that in mind, the title of the program today is Did It Change Everything? Last year when I was here, I think the title of the program was What the Bleep Happened? So that was, and again, I think, hey, listen, that wasn't a partisan thing. That's what the Trump campaign was saying on election night 2016. They didn't expect it, I know that. I know that for sure. So, so now it's a question a year later, a year after really the most shocking political event, certainly in modern history, maybe in American political history, the most shocking, unexpected, high-stakes event. Did it change everything? So when I say that I try to approach this by saying I'm not sure, I think there's two different ways to look at where we are right now, a year in. Year after the election, almost a year after Donald Trump's inauguration. You guys follow the news closely. I'm sure you're aware of the sort of narrative of the Trump presidency right now, which is Republican White House, Republican Senate, Republican House. It's that dream combination where a political party's supposed to be able to pass anything it wants, and yet here we are. Thanksgiving's basically upon us, and Republicans don't have a single major achievement they put through Congress, not a single major achievement, a bill they put on Trump's desk that he can sign and say, here we go, I've done it. Nothing on the wall, nothing on Obamacare, nothing on the big ticket stuff, the $1 trillion for infrastructure, the big ticket stuff that he campaigned on. So from a traditional standpoint, this is a first-year presidency. It really hasn't accomplished anything. He got a Supreme Court justice confirmed. That had a lot more to do with what Republicans in the Senate did a year ago by refusing to consider a nominee from Barack Obama. I wouldn't count that really as an achievement in a sort of traditional sense. But in the traditional sense, he doesn't have big achievements. In his first year in office, Barack Obama in 2009, he had a similar setup. He had a Democratic Senate, ended up with 60 votes for some of that year, which is that magic number where you can do things without a filibuster. He had that for a lot of 2009. He had a big Democratic majority in the House. He got a stimulus package, massive stimulus package through, economic stimulus. He got a fair pay law through. He was moving towards, at this point in his first year, the Democrats were rapidly moving towards the Affordable Care Act, towards health care reform. That was passed in March of 2010, but by Thanksgiving of 2009, they were well on their way to that. They were also on their way to passing a big Wall Street reform package in the wake of the meltdown, the Dodd-Frank Wall Street Reform Pact. I mean, big ticket items. They were using their majorities for that. And again, comparably, 8 years later, Donald Trump and the Republicans walk into the same situation. They've got nothing to show for it. And so, from one standpoint, let me see if I'm doing this right. It works. Look at that. Technology. So, from one standpoint, you can put a narrative together, and I'd say this is sort of the traditional standpoint, by the traditional standards of politics, the way we've understood every presidency, every modern presidency, until the Trump presidency. By that standard and by those measures, this presidency is in political collapse. This is a presidency that was empowered with massive congressional majorities, didn't get anything, so far hasn't gotten anything through, and what you're seeing here, Gallup, they do a daily poll. Every single day they're spitting out a number. They're constantly on the phone with people, constantly asking them, do you approve of Donald Trump's performance as president? This is a daily number. You can see the ebb and flow there, and look at that. His first week in office, January 20th is the inauguration, so January 25th, that's his high point. The entire presidency, his peak, is 46%. I mean, 46% for any other president in the modern era in a first year, at any point in a first year, 46% would be very low, would be very disappointing, would be, you know, folks saying this presidency is sort of spiraling here. How do they turn it around? Well, that was Donald Trump's high point. It was his first week in office. To the extent this guy had a honeymoon, you're looking at it. 46%. That's it. This, you cannot find, it's tough to find a comparison to this. And you can see the low point, and it's been somewhere, you know, after the first 3 or 4 months, you see the normal adjustment sort of fell below 40%. He's basically been below 40% now since the end of May, since the start of June, and he hit his low point of 33%. 33% approval rating at the end of October. I mean, by any historical standard, this is a terrible place for a president to be politically. Historically, you would say, well, it makes sense, right? President came to office, all sorts of expectations, all sorts of power, the control of Congress that we talked about, nothing to show for it, all sorts of dysfunction in terms of, you know, Trump fighting with Republicans in Washington, Trump stepping on his own message, Trump blowing up his own program in Congress on more than one occasion, and he's paying a price for it. He's extremely unpopular. That is one narrative, and I think it's absolutely possible that the story of the Trump presidency, the political story of the Trump presidency, the reality of the Trump presidency, a year after his election, I think you could paint a picture, you could tell a story that Donald Trump, through this confluence of extraordinary circumstances in 2016, including an opponent who was unusually polarizing, unusually unpopular herself, who had been at the center of the national political stage for a generation before she ran for president, for 25 years. Hillary Clinton had been a major national political figure. That burdened her with a level of sort of a polarizing nature that Trump was able to capitalize on. A very unique circumstance. Very unique circumstance in terms of he was able to win the presidency despite losing the popular vote by 2.8 million votes. He got just enough votes in just the right states to get an electoral college majority. A very unusual circumstance in that Hillary Clinton had that email scandal. The entire campaign, right up until the week before when James Comey, the FBI director, comes out there and says, oh my God, we found new emails, we're reopening the investigation. And then quietly, a few days later, he says, never mind, we found nothing there. That confluence of circumstances leads Donald Trump to become president with 46% of the vote, with a 2.8 million vote gap in the popular vote. So he doesn't come in that popular, doesn't get anything accomplished, and lo and behold, he's just at absolute sort of rock bottom levels in the polls. This is a political disaster. The Democrats nominate anybody not named Hillary Clinton in 2020, they'll wipe Donald Trump out. Possible. I think it's entirely possible that's where we are right now. And from that standpoint, when you ask the question, has anything changed in politics? If that narrative I just put together is true or correct or mostly true or mostly correct, then the answer is, well, you know, I mean, things have changed. We've got a presidency like we've never seen before, but the basic laws of political gravity as we've understood them are going to apply to this presidency, and there's going to be political consequences for the kinds of numbers we're talking about. But that said, think back to the election last year. We talk about how unpopular Hillary Clinton was, how polarizing she was, all the stuff with the emails, all the stuff with James Comey, but this is the exit poll on election day. And as unpopular as Hillary Clinton was, on every single statistical category, Donald Trump scored worse, in some cases significantly worse. These are categories that we thought were threshold questions. These are questions that if a candidate doesn't pass them, if the candidate doesn't pass this test with voters, those voters won't vote for that candidate. Does Donald Trump have the temperament to be president? On election day last year, in the exit poll, basically a third of the country said yes, 2/3 said no, 35% to 65%. Does he have the temperament? Is he qualified to be president? 38% said yes. Hillary Clinton's numbers, by the way, were like 20, 30 points higher on these two questions on election day. That was the thing last year, with all of the sort of negativity around Hillary Clinton, all the stuff about her being polarizing. Ultimately, that was the thing throughout the fall campaign that was supposed to save her. The idea was, we say all these rules that we thought applied, that was one of the rules that we thought applied in the campaign. If there's that big of a gap on a question so fundamental, is the person qualified? Does the person have the temperament? Do you think they'll just sit in the office and behave like a president should? If there's that big of a gap between the candidates, then the one at the low end of that gap isn't going to get elected. Well, again, you have a positive opinion of Donald Trump. Only 40% had a positive opinion, 60% had a negative opinion. Even on that, Hillary Clinton scored better than Donald Trump. And yet, Donald Trump got elected, and that means he got elected. You can do the math. You know, he got a little more than 46% of the vote, popular vote. It's an awful lot of people. That's millions of people who made a judgment that Donald Trump wasn't qualified, didn't have the temperament, and they didn't like him. And they voted for him anyway. They voted for him for president of the United States. And I think that introduces, there's a lot of different ways to interpret that. But I think that introduces a unique variable into this presidency and into trying to understand this presidency. And it's one that makes me hesitant to say that first narrative I just laid out for you, the narrative of political collapse from Donald Trump, it makes me hesitant to say I'm confident. Because that's the question. Why were millions of Americans willing to have that low of an opinion of Donald Trump? And to have the low expectations, that speaks to just very, very low expectations for what Donald Trump could be as president. What does it mean that they voted for him anyway? And the fact that they voted for him anyway, the fact that he scored so low on every measure that we thought was significant and crucial for a candidate, the fact that he scored that low, well, what does that say when he's at 35%, 38%, whatever, an approval rating right now? In the past, 38% first-year approval rating, disaster. Okay, but in the past, those numbers were absolutely disastrous, fatal, catastrophic for a candidate for president. So it raises a question to me if there is something else that Donald Trump tapped into in the campaign, something else that he might be tapping into now, something else that he could tap into if he decides to run for re-election in 2020, something that maybe isn't measured by the metrics that we have, the polling metrics that we have. This is the thing that I have been thinking about, and I've been asking myself, and I've been talking to other people about how you measure. It's a question of culture. You know, we say he doesn't have any legislative achievements, but Donald Trump didn't seem interested as a candidate, and hasn't seemed interested in the president in scoring any legislative achievements. What he has seemed interested in as president, and what he did seem interested in doing as a candidate, was stirring up culture war fights. I mean, most recently, the NFL, the flag, national anthem at NFL games, the players kneeling. That controversy broke out because Donald Trump instigated it. He was down in Alabama at the end of September, campaigning for Luther Strange, who's an appointed incumbent to the Senate. He was running against Roy Moore, the Republican runoff. Trump was supposed to be down there to campaign for Strange. It was the first thing he was supposed to be doing that night in Alabama. The second thing he was supposed to be doing was saving the Republican health care bill. It was on the brink in the Senate. It passed the House. They needed to get it through the Senate. You had Republicans who were getting very, very nervous about voting for it. It was on the line in the Senate, and Donald Trump was supposed to be also in that speech making the case for health care, saving health care. And he got up on stage, he started talking, didn't have much of a script, went off his script, and he started riffing about football. He was in Alabama. He thinks of college football. He thinks of Bear Bryant, University of Alabama, Nick Saban, all that stuff. Starts talking to the crowd about football, and you can see this is a guy, he has those showman's instincts. And he sees he's connecting with the crowd talking about football. And then you could just see it. At some point he makes this connection. This wasn't in a script or anything. He just starts talking about those NFL players, they won't stand for the national anthem. That's disgraceful. And the crowd, he starts getting a bigger response from the crowd, much bigger response from the crowd to that than anything he said about healthcare, anything he said about taxes, anything he said about Luther Strange, anything he said about sort of a traditional legislative issue, a traditional political issue. But that issue of the national anthem, he starts getting an electric response from the crowd, and he just rides it. He just keeps talking about it. And of course, it stirs up an equally passionate response from folks who are offended by what he's saying. And what erupts from that is a fight that is much bigger than politics. It was a fight that brought in not just the political media. It wasn't just waged on Meet the Press. It wasn't just waged on Nightly News or some politics blog. It was a fight that was waged across all of culture. Late night television, movie stars, music stars, Saturday Night Live, ESPN, and an ESPN anchor, Jameel Hill, got into a whole controversy directly related to that. This became a culture war conflagration. And I think it's a moment we've seen so many times with Trump, as a candidate and as a president. And it makes me wonder, and this is, I think, something time is going to tell, but it makes me wonder if that's a significant part of what powers Trump. Where if you say, is he qualified? No. Does he have the temperament? No. Has he done anything? Has he achieved anything major or significant legislatively? No. So how did he win the election? I mean, one possibility is it was cultural polarization. It was doing what he did with the NFL a few weeks ago on all sorts of topics. Immigration's another one that he talked about during the campaign. All sorts of topics that engaged all of the culture and that really, really heightened divisions in this country. Not just racial divisions, but class divisions. Because that's what we saw on Election Day last year. We saw a wider gap than we've ever seen before. I talk about this all the time on the air. This is sort of the new stat that folks following elections pay attention to. College, non-college. And folks with a college degree versus folks without a college degree. And it's a sort of a measure, a stand-in. It's almost like it's a question of social class. Two different social classes there. Huge, huge gap. Almost a 40-point gap between how those two groups voted. And it raises a question. Donald Trump doing extremely well with the non-college whites. That's the group. A lot of these folks, rural, ex-urban, and particularly in the northern tier of the country, places like Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, that he won. Is there something there where when Donald Trump stirs up these fights that ignite all of culture, does that account for it? Is it folks who think, yeah, I think he's kind of a con man, but he's on my side in this bigger cultural fight. He's got the right enemies. He's got all of those snobs in Hollywood, or all of those arrogant folks in the mainstream media, whatever you want to call it. He's got all of them riled up. And I don't like any of them because they look down on me. Is that the source of his appeal? Was that the source of his appeal in the campaign? Can that explain how millions of people thought he was unqualified, how he didn't have the temperament, and voted for him anyway? And if that's the case, if that was his power then, could that be his power now and going forward in 2020? Could that make a 35% approval rating? Could it make it a red herring? Whereas in the past, with presidents who did not stir up these culture war fights constantly, who actually went out of their way to try to avoid them, where a 35% approval rating for those presidents was simply disastrous. Could it be different with Trump, where sure, 35% think he's doing a good job as president, but when push comes to shove and they've got to choose between Trump and the other side in a culture war, they're going to say, yeah, he's a lousy president, but he's on my side in that. It's a possibility, and I'm not sure how to measure it, and it's a possibility I would never have entertained with a past presidency, but with this one, that's one of the things that's on my mind. So when I say I don't know, and I'm not sure, and I'm thinking of different possibilities, that's one that I'm thinking of. But check this out. So let's play these two different sort of scenarios out here. This tells you, again, if we're back to that traditional model, this tells you what we can expect in the coming year. A year from now, if I'm back here, or if anybody else is back here, talking to you just after the 2018 midterms, if this presidency, if the traditional laws of politics apply to this presidency in the year 2018, in the 2018 midterm elections, I mean, check this out. This is what a low approval rating means for a president in a midterm election. Barack Obama, 2010. Remember, Democrats had those massive majorities in the House and Senate, 63-seat catastrophe. Republicans took control in 2010. In 2006, remember, what was that? That was Bush's sixth year as president. He'd been reelected in 2004. Iraq was spiraling out of control. There was a whole bunch of scandals involving the Republican majority in the House. Democrats actually ran for the House in 2006 on a slogan Donald Trump used last year. They said, "Drain the swamp." That was the refrain from Democrats in 2006 for the House, and you can see Republicans lost their majority. They'd had the majority in the House for 12 years in the 2006 midterm with Bush's approval rating all the way down at 33%. That number look familiar? That's about where Trump is right now. Republicans lost the House. By the way, if Republicans are going to lose the House in 2018, the number is 24. That's the magic number for Democrats. So it cost them 30 seats with Bush. If it cost them 24 seats with Trump, Republicans lose the House. See Bill Clinton, 1994. Call that one the Republican Revolution. That's when Newt Gingrich became the Speaker of the House. That was the end of 40 uninterrupted years, 40 continuous years of Democratic control of the House. They were calling it the Permanent Democratic Congress. Along comes Bill Clinton. Approval rating of 43%. It had been lower for other parts of that first 2 years for him. 54-seat landslide for Republicans. Newt Gingrich becomes the Speaker. And Ronald Reagan, in 1982, had a big recession. The unemployment rate hit 10% a month before that election in 1982. The number may be deceptively low when you say 26. You got to remember the Republicans going into 1982, they were the permanent minority party. They didn't have that many seats to start with. So a 26-seat loss for them in 1982 was actually more severe maybe than it looks. But that's the history. You don't have, in modern times, you don't have presidents walking into midterm elections with 35% approval ratings and seeing their party gain seats. You don't see presidents walking into midterm elections with 35% approval ratings and holding their own. You see presidents walking in there with 35% or low 40% even. And it's a wipeout. I mean, part of it, I think the key part of it is the low approval rating, but also part of it, too, is it seems the pattern of midterm elections is the White House party, the scales are sort of tipped against the White House party to start with. There's almost like a buyer's remorse phenomenon, where a president gets elected in this election, and then 2 years later, there's a little bit of a check on that. Some voters just, sort of want to check the power, I think, instinctively. Some of it has to do with who shows up for elections. It may be that having a president of this party just sort of automatically motivates the voters of the other party. Sort of right now, you call it. Right now, we're really seeing it. You call it the resistance. That's what Trump has stirred up. But that seems to be a phenomenon in general with presidencies. But you can see when you add on top of that a low approval rating, you see catastrophe. And so when you look at Donald Trump's approval rating, 46% in his first week in office, in his honeymoon week is the absolute peak, and 30-something% has been the norm since the summer. I don't see anything on the horizon, just based on how this has gone for 10 months. I don't see anything on the horizon that's going to suddenly change that. I don't see Donald Trump suddenly bending his instincts to conduct himself differently as president. So, I mean, we will see if his approval rating changes in the next year, but if he's where he's been for his entire presidency, history says he and the Republican Party in particular, because they're the names that are on the ballot next year, not him, they're heading for a disaster in 2018. Again, that's the traditional model of politics. Now, here's the other thing that interests me, though, and this is where we throw a little bit of a twist into this. We've gotten a few tests, a few actual election tests since last November, of where things stand post-Trump election. What these are here, these are 4 special elections for Congress. So these are seats where, these are basically Trump-picked people from these districts. These were Republican-held districts where Trump picked members of Congress, Republican members of Congress, to be in his cabinet, to be in his administration. And so special elections were held. So these were Republican districts. He had a series of special elections this spring. And again, the pattern I'm describing here of a sort of the traditional rules of politics would say that in special elections, or in any elections, the party of a president with a 30-something% approval rating is going to take a hit. And you can see in 3 of these. You start with the 4th District of Kansas. That's around Wichita. That's a very Republican district. Donald Trump won that by 27 points on Election Day in 2016. It was 60 to 33% in that district. They held a special election this spring, and the Republicans won. Trump bragged about this one. The Republicans in Washington bragged about it, but look at that. There's a swing of 20 points in the Democrats' direction. It went from a 27-point Trump win in that district to having a special election for Congress, and the Republican won by only 7 points. And to put that in some perspective, in that district, you got to go back more than 20 years. You got to go back to the 1990s when a guy named Dan Glickman, a Democrat, was actually winning that district. It's the last time Democrats were that close, were within single digits in that district. That's a pretty significant shift. And if that happens one time, who knows? Maybe it was a bad Republican candidate, maybe it was a strange campaign, whatever. But that is a pattern we're seeing. Because look at Montana, at large. It's the entire state, one congressional district for the entire state. Now, if you remember this election, I think that the headline people probably remember is the Republican candidate body slamming a reporter the night before the election. Now, I don't think that really factored into the results because this is a state where 90% of the votes were cast before the election. And this happened on election eve. So most of the votes, the vast majority of the votes were cast before that happened. So I do think this is a pretty good measure, and it doesn't really reflect some response to that last second event. And again, Donald Trump won Montana easily in the 2016 election by 21 points. Republicans held the seat. Trump bragged about it. But look at that, it went 15 points in the Democrats' direction. It's a big shift. I'll skip over the Georgia one for a second, because we'll talk about that in a minute. But you see also the 5th District of South Carolina, that's around the Rock Hill area, Metro Charlotte a little bit. Mick Mulvaney was the Republican congressman there. He left to become Trump's budget director. From 18 points for Trump. This is one the Democrats almost won. I remember watching the results come in this district on the special election. This was back in June. For a while there, it looked like the Democrats were actually going to win this district. And Republicans were panicking as these results came in. Did not get a lot of national attention in this race. Not a lot of money spent there. Not a lot of focus on it. And again, you see a big shift towards the Democrats. And we don't have it on the screen, but the other thing I can tell you is if you really look at this stuff microscopically, if you really look at elections microscopically since last November, and what I mean by that is special elections for state legislative seats around the country, district in New Hampshire where 1,500 people will vote, random district in Oklahoma, random district in Washington State, stuff like that. I'm not inclined generally to look at one random race for state representative and read much into it, but there have been several dozen of them. And this pattern we're seeing in Kansas 4, in the Montana at-large seat, in the 5th District of South Carolina, this pattern has held up in those seats as well. Republican-held seats, moving towards whether the Democrat wins them or not, movement of 15, 20 points towards the Democrat in those districts. Some of them Democrats have won, some of them they haven't, but you've seen that movement very consistently. Dozens of races for state legislature. Same thing. So what that tells me is, in a lot of these races, the key here, of course, is these are races that they're pretty much under the radar. We're not talking about them on MSNBC. They're not talking about them on Fox News. They're not prominently featured in social media streams, that kind of thing, but they're happening. And what that speaks to me, I think, are a couple things. Number one, like I said, there's the traditional pattern. It seems that, president gets elected, and then the midterm and the special elections before the midterm, the electorate kind of turns against the president's party. There's a certain amount of gravity there that we're used to. But what it also speaks to, I think, is there really does seem to be extraordinary energy on the Democratic side right now. Extraordinary energy that's been kicked up by Donald Trump's election and by Donald Trump being president. And by Donald Trump acting as president the way Donald Trump acted as a candidate, which is to say, not exactly trying to unify the country with everything that he says and does. And what that's kicked up is, it's hard to look at these three and all those state legislative races and say, there isn't a huge disparity right now. When you just put a random election out there and you don't give it much attention, you don't give it much publicity, that's a real test there of which side is more motivated. And I think the Democratic side is vastly more motivated, and there's vastly more energy right now on the Democratic side than there is on the Republican side. And that's what you see. And again, all of that speaks to when we say president with a 30-something% approval rating, taking it on the chin in the midterm election, all of what I just described is consistent with that. If Donald Trump's 35% approval rating is going to lead to Republicans losing the House next year and Democrats taking, dozens of House seats, everything I'm describing about these special elections is exactly what you'd expect to see. And it also, I think, is pretty consistent with the traditional rules of politics as we've understood them. But, one exception that gnaws at me and keeps me from standing here and confidently telling you that that's the way we should look at this. And it's the one I skipped over on there. Is the 6th District of Georgia. This is the other big special election this year, and this is the one that breaks the pattern I just described. So, 6th District of Georgia is the suburbs north of Atlanta. It's a traditionally Republican district. It was actually created back in 1992. It was an effort by Democrats. Democrats back in 1992 ran the state of Georgia still. Newt Gingrich was still around back then. He's from Georgia. The Democrats hated Newt Gingrich, and they created this district as a way of trying to kill him politically. Didn't work. But that's the origin of the 6th District. It's a suburban district north of Atlanta. Now, it is a pretty Republican district, traditionally. It's a district that Mitt Romney carried by 23 points when he ran against Barack Obama in 2012. But it's a different kind of Republican than Trump has appealed to. We talk about that class divide, that college, non-college. Donald Trump's core has been the non-college white, rural, exurban, blue collar, Rust Belt, rural South. That's where Donald Trump has put up the big, massive margins in 2016. This district's a different profile. This is the college-educated white. This is upscale economically. This is commuter class. This is white collar. Different strain. Doesn't necessarily go for the kind of culture war politics of Trump. So look at that. Look what happened in 2016. Trump won the district by a point. So in other words, Romney, the Republican in 2012, wins this thing by more than 20 points. And in 2016, Donald Trump almost loses it. And this is the kind of district, after the 2016 election, the Democrats circled on their maps. And they said, this is our future. As long as Donald Trump is president, this is the kind of place where we're going to score our biggest gains. Because these are the kinds of voters, traditionally Republican voters, who do not go at all for Donald Trump's culture war politics. In many cases, who are offended by Donald Trump's culture war politics. That's where we're going to make our inroads. And so they circled Georgia 6. When Trump pulled Tom Price, the congressman, out of that district, made him his HHS secretary. That didn't work out too well either. That's another story. But when he put him into his cabinet, Democrats circled that one, and they said, this is where we're going to show folks that the resistance to Donald Trump is going to roll over Republicans in 2018 and beyond. Because if Donald Trump could barely carry that as a candidate against Hillary Clinton with all of her baggage, well, by God, Donald Trump as president, getting nothing done legislatively, stirring up all these culture war fights, it's going to get worse. And by the way, we are more motivated. We Democrats are more motivated than Republicans. So if in a presidential election it was basically a draw in that district, that motivation, that energy edge that we're seeing in all these other special elections, that's going to put us over the top in that 6th District of Georgia. So this is the district, I'm sure everybody here remembers this campaign. John Ossoff, Democratic nominee, tens of millions of dollars nationally pour into this race. Democrats across the country are focused on this thing. Celebrities start going to the 6th District and campaigning. Alyssa Milano, from Who's the Boss? Anybody remembers that one years ago? But Alyssa Milano goes down there and she starts giving rides to the polls during early voting for John Ossoff supporters. John Ossoff is on late night television. My network, NBC, we've got Late Night with Seth Meyers. It's a nice special guest. John Ossoff, congressional candidate in Georgia. When have you seen this in the past? I mean, this is not the stuff that the popular culture has cared about in the past. And Republicans, with that kind of interest from Democrats, that kind of noise from Democrats, that kind of noise from popular culture, that kind of money from Democrats around the country, Republicans start getting interested in this race. This is different than the 5th District of South Carolina, than the at-large race in Montana, the 4th District in Kansas. This is different than the random state representative race in Delaware. This is one that's now engaging Republicans, not so much because they like Donald Trump, but because they don't like all the Democrats who are making a lot of noise about this thing. And a lot of noise not just in politics, but a lot of noise in popular culture. And so what happens? Big money starts flowing into the Republican candidate, Karen Handel. A lot of energy starts getting kicked up on the Republican side for Karen Handel. Donald Trump starts tweeting about this one. Donald Trump starts taking shots at John Ossoff. It becomes a national event. There is no question, this was the most hotly contested in terms of money, in terms of media attention, in terms of cultural attention. This is the most hotly contested special election for Congress we've ever seen. I mean, it's crazy. This is a random House district. There's an open congressional district here in this district next year, 3rd District of Massachusetts. They'll have nothing on what happened in the 6th District of Georgia this past spring. Everybody got engaged in this thing, and what happened? There's the result. The district that Trump won by a point, where Democrats looked at that and they said, you know what, this is the kind of district we're going to start taking now. This is a district we're going to swamp them with our energy advantage. Actually, it swung toward the Republicans. Trump won it by a point. Karen Handel, the Republican nominee, won it by 4 points. It's the exception to every other thing we've seen in these special elections. And there's a couple ways of looking at that, I think. You know, one is, well, okay, it's the exception. Not everything is going to go the same way, but you take the totality of what you're looking at and you see Democrats racking up gains, racking up wins everywhere. Okay, there's an exception, but this is still, the pendulum is clearly swinging in the Democrats' way to 2018. Excuse me. Possible, very possible. But what gnaws at me is the other possibility. It's not just a random exception. You could argue that the reason that happened was because this race was different than all the others in terms of the attention that it generated, in terms of the focus that Democrats put on it, and as I said, sort of the energy and the noise and the visibility across all of culture that they generated for this race. That seemed to motivate Republicans. So it raises a question for me. It's some sort of a negative energy. Stop the Democrats, stop the liberals. That seemed to motivate Republicans, and it seemed to produce a different result than we see in these other races. Is that something Republicans could end up stirring up in 2018? Election day 2018, think of it, the month before, everybody's talking about politics, everybody's talking about elections, Trump's tweeting, Democrats with all their money, it becomes an atmosphere like we had in the final month of the 2016 presidential campaign. Does that kind of atmosphere get generated next fall, and then does every congressional district sort of do across the country what we saw in Georgia 6, where it's not just the Democrats who are hugely motivated, like we've seen in all these other races, and who swamp the Republicans, but do the Republicans get motivated just because the Democrats are motivated, and just because this thing is now a major, major event? Does that happen? That's the question I have. I can give you reasons why that's probably a far-fetched scenario, but I don't know. I think it's something to consider in light of the sort of unusual possibilities that Trump's election creates. So Georgia 6 is the one that gnaws at me. And by the way, if that happened, so in Georgia 6, you had the result into the Trump-Clinton result in 2016, and it was basically the same result in the special election, even a few points better for the Republican. But if every congressional district voted in the 2018 midterm election the way it voted in the Trump-Clinton race, Republicans keep the House. So that's the one that haunts me. When I look at all the others and I start saying, oh my God, the Democrats are going to gain 40 seats next year. I've had plenty of moments where I think that. I still half think it right now. Maybe 2/3 think it. But that's the one thing that gnaws at me when I say that. I'll close with this, and then we'll get to questions. The other big piece of evidence we have is what just happened. It was early last week in Virginia. There was also a governor's race in New Jersey. Virginia's closer to being a swing state, so I think this one's a little bit more relevant. This is the one that got much more attention, much more money, all that sort of thing. It's an interesting result. This is the one, obviously, that Democrats, I've talked to so many Democrats since then who are just, they're loving this. They finally got a win. The 15, 20-point improvement in those congressional districts was nice, but they didn't win, so they weren't that excited. This one got Democrats excited because finally, for the first time since Donald Trump became president, there was a marquee election held, and Democrats won it. Their candidate, Ralph Northam, won the Virginia governor's race last week by 9 points over the Republican Ed Gillespie. And it was extra exciting for Democrats because there was a lot of panic in the final days of that campaign where, oh my God, is Northam blowing this? We all remember how we thought Hillary had it in the bag, and then there was this shift toward Trump at the end. Is that going to happen here again? There was a lot of panic, a lot of negativity among Democrats, and then they started watching the results come in on election night. And I was at MSNBC, and we had normal primetime programming, and they told me, call into the control room if there's something we should know about this election in terms of how it's going. And I told them, I said, hey, it's Virginia. See those blue areas, the very northern part of the state, that's the DC suburbs. Like a quarter of the state lives just in those blue counties, and they usually take forever to report. So I'm telling the guys in the control room, look, 10:30, 11 o'clock tonight, I might call you with something, but it's going to take a long time until we know the winner of this race. Well, I was off by about 2.5 hours because by 8:15, First of all, the reporting was a little faster in Northern Virginia, but also it was just much more decisive than it had looked going into it. And you can see Ralph Northam pulling out nearly a 10-point win. That is the biggest win, just by percentage, that Democrats had in Virginia, really in 30 years. You got to go back to 1985 when they had a governor's race, the final one that was as big as that. So what is the Virginia result? What clues does the Virginia result offer to us? Two things, I think. Number one is Democrats, I think, are understandably giddy about this one. And there are some things when you look at Virginia that they should be very happy about. The biggest one is those blue counties right outside Washington, D.C. Because they're sort of like I was just describing in Georgia's 6th district. Again, these are higher income suburbs. These are college educated. This area 20 years ago, 30 years ago was Republican. It had already started moving pretty decisively towards Democrats, so it's a little different than Georgia 6 in that regard. This was already, even before Donald Trump came on the scene, these counties were already Democratic counties. But what happened was, in 2016, they went from being, strong Democratic counties to extremely strong Democratic counties. Hillary Clinton improved on the typical Democratic performance by like double digits, especially in the real near DC counties there, which are one little speck on there, Alexandria and everything. But anyway, Democrats did extremely well in 2016 because there was a lot of movement here against Donald Trump, again, because of that whole sort of social class thing. The theory of the Republican campaign in Virginia is that Ed Gillespie would sort of revert. He would cause things to revert. So if you look at those counties there in Northern Virginia, there's Republicans in modern times do badly, but not so badly that they can't make up for it in the rest of the state. Trump did really badly, okay? That was the difference. And so the Gillespie theory was, well, Ed Gillespie's not Donald Trump. He was the RNC chairman under George Bush. He was in the Bush administration. He's the traditional establishment Republican, big lobbyist. He reads as a traditional pre-Donald Trump Republican. He will do just sort of normal Republican bad in Northern Virginia, and it won't sink them in the rest of the state. And the bad news for Republicans, and the thing that's really got to excite Democrats, that didn't happen. Trump-era bad in Northern Virginia translated to Ed Gillespie, even though Donald Trump wasn't on the ballot. So that brings Democrats to a new level of support in that part of the state. They've been doing really well there for the last generation. Now they're doing even better. And it looks like, at least while Donald Trump is president, even if Trump's not on the ballot, you're going to have Democrats doing as well there as they did in 2016. Plus, the other thing is, we're talking about that energy motivation turnout through the roof. Absolutely through the roof in those areas. These are just extremely motivated voters. That's why it's not just that Northam won, why the margin ended up ticking up from, Hillary Clinton won the state last year by about 5.5 points over Donald Trump. The reason why it went from 5.5 to 9 is that not only did Northam get Hillary Clinton, not only did Northam get Hillary Clinton level support in those counties, he got proportionally even better turnout, proportionate to the rest of the state. So, a 5.5 Clinton point win, they gave him a 9-point Northam win. Turnout really does that. And that's encouraging for Democrats because districts like that around the country, well, can they replicate that? There are a lot of districts around the country. I think this next slide I can show you. Yeah, so these are, we say 24 is the magic number. 24 is the magic number for Democrats to take back the House. What you're looking at here are 23 districts, 23 Republican incumbents. Some of them are not running for re-election next year, but there's going to be an election in their district. So there are 23 Republican-held seats in the House that are in districts that voted for Hillary Clinton. And most of those districts kind of come close to the profile we're talking about here in Northern Virginia. These tend to be, and you can see, bunched together there in the Mid-Atlantic, a bunch of them are in New Jersey, a bunch of them are in California. These tend to be, sort of that model of suburban. These are, suburban college-educated districts where Hillary Clinton won them because there was a particular move against Donald Trump, but the Republican incumbent held on. Well, this is where Democrats are training this is their number one sort of tier of target in 2018. If they were to win all of these districts, which is probably a stretch, but theoretically, if they were to win all of these districts in 2018, that almost gets them the House right there. It's 23. They take over 23 Republican seats with only needing, one more. And those districts, pretty similar demographically to what you got there in Northern Virginia. So I know the day after the election, I used to cover New Jersey politics. I was talking to some folks, some of those faces there in New Jersey. It was actually the night of the election. The guy whose face, Frank Lobiondo was his name, his face is in the Atlantic Ocean. Virginia results were coming in and he announced his retirement. He's not even going to run next year. He's been there for 22 years. That guy, Leonard Lance, is the one directly above him. He's from a district, a Hillary Clinton district in New Jersey. It's a very well-to-do district. He's running scared. And I talk to people around him. They don't know they've not had an environment like this, and they don't know how to handle it. The Democrats there are raising just huge sums of money because Democrats around the country are identifying these districts too and sending money and sending resources in. So the immediate thing that Virginia does is it provides Democrats a psychological win. It shows that these suburban areas that swung hard against Donald Trump, they are staying at that level against Donald Trump. And that means any Republican in a Clinton district, which tends to be these suburban districts that swung against Donald Trump, they got to be panicking. They got to be really worrying about 2018, especially with Donald Trump sitting there at a 30-something% approval rating. The cautionary note, and I'll close on this, the cautionary note that Virginia introduces, though, and I always say there's these two different possible interpretations, is as well as the Democrats, as well as Ralph Northam did there in those suburban counties in Northern Virginia, enough to win the state, Ed Gillespie also performed at Trump level in places where it was advantageous to him. So if you look in the sort of the southwest part of the state, okay, that's rural Virginia down there, those counties don't have a lot of people in them, but you see there's a lot of them, just numerically. They add up. The votes there add up. And it's sort of like Northern Virginia. It's the reverse, the mirror image of Northern Virginia. These are counties that way back, 2 generations ago, were Democratic, old school, when Democrats were sort of the conservative party of the South. They used to be Democratic districts. They've migrated to the Republican fold in modern times. They've become Republican counties, Republican areas. And so Republicans have been doing pretty well, really well, in rural southwest Virginia. Well, in 2016, Donald Trump came along, talk about that class divide. He went from doing really well, like Republicans have been doing, to like through the roof well. Take Washington County in southwest Virginia. It's one of the bigger ones of those small counties. Donald Trump took what had been in the last election, before 2016 in Virginia, Washington County went Republican by 33 points. Trump turns around, he wins it by 53 points. Those are the kind of swings that Donald Trump got in the rural parts of Virginia. So he took a bath in the suburbs of Washington, D.C., couldn't win the state, couldn't overcome the kind of deficit he got up there, but it would have been a lot worse for Trump in 2016 if he hadn't had huge numbers in southwest Virginia. So that was another question. When we say like Gillespie wanted to return to normal Republican levels in the suburbs of D.C., Democrats wanted to return to normal Democratic levels in the rest of the state. They also failed to do that. They did not, Ed Gillespie basically got Trump levels of support in southwest Virginia. It was an interesting thing to watch because the campaign that Gillespie ran, he tried to run a 2-track campaign. He ran on cultural issues. He ran on immigration. He ran on this Central American gang, M13. He ran on Confederate battle statues. Say, we could keep him up. Democrats want to take him down. We should keep him up. Those were the issues, the core issues that Ed Gillespie ran on. That's a huge shift for a guy who's been like Mr. Establishment Republican. A guy who helped George W. Bush try to rewrite immigration law in the mid-2000s to try to have a pathway to citizenship. He reversed himself completely, reinvented himself as that Donald Trump-style culture war Republican, cultural issues. He did that without actually having Donald Trump come in and campaign for him. He did that while campaigning as, by not talking about those issues when he was in Northern Virginia and not putting mailers out and ads out in Northern Virginia that talked about those issues. He was trying to have it both ways. He was trying to run on Trumpism without getting the burden of Donald Trump. He got half of it. He got Trump-level support in southwest Virginia. Places where demographically Trumpism resonated in 2016, that message resonated for Ed Gillespie. But he did not return to traditional Republican strength in those suburbs. So it wasn't enough to win, but it does introduce the possibility when you get away from those 23 districts, when you get away from those Hillary Clinton districts where Republicans are running, where else do Democrats make their gains? Those 23 are like the northern suburbs like the DC suburbs. All right, you get all 23, you're close. You're probably not going to get all 23. You need more. Where do you get them? And one thing Democrats have to worry about, there's 10 districts as well. I don't have them on this map, but there's 10 districts. They tend to span Pennsylvania, Ohio, Wisconsin, Michigan, Minnesota. 10 districts where you've got Democrats who are incumbent members of Congress, and Donald Trump won the district. So if you got an Ed Gillespie-like, if Republican candidates around the country kind of embrace that Ed Gillespie style, okay, if they're running in a place like this, that's going to cost them in 2018 probably. That's what Virginia suggests. But if they're running in one of those 10 districts, does it help them? Do they get Trump levels of support in those districts like Gillespie was able to get in Southwest Virginia? So that's a complicating thing that Democrats have to think about. I think in their glee, in their understandable glee and euphoria and excitement about Virginia, boy, the Virginia map looks an awful lot like it did on Election Day 2016. And if the national map in 2018, or for that matter 2020, looks like it did on Election Day 2016, Democrats are right back where they were on Election Day 2016. So I will wrap it up there. We began with the question, did it change everything? And I will end with the answer, I don't know. But those are the possibilities that I see.
So we'll have time for some questions, and I'm going to ask David Tedisco to take the mic around, and we're going to try to be spread around as much as we can. So, David, you want to start maybe with this young lady in the second row?
Thank you very much. I have a question for you regarding a projection of the Alabama Senate race. And if Moore succeeds, how will that affect the GOP senators, do you feel, would they expel him? If, this is hypothetical,
right,
if they did expel him, would that give Sessions an opportunity to go in and fill in that spot so that Trump could fire and with his new Attorney General Mueller?
All right, we've got about 12 different... let's... A couple pieces here. This is Alabama. I'm sure everybody here is following this thing. And who thought we'd be following an Alabama Senate race in Thanksgiving of 2017? It's fascinating. Look, the last time Alabama's gotten so Republican in modern times, the last time a Senate race in Alabama finished with a Democrat within 10 points was 1996. The last time a Democrat was within 20 points in a Senate race in Alabama was 2002. So these things are generally wipeouts. So the fact that we're even talking about it says something. Can Roy Moore, despite everything we've been seeing, despite everything that may come between now and December 12th and that special election scheduled, can he win the election? I think it's possible just because of the history that I just said, that I just laid out. I think it's also possible because the voting in Alabama and the voting in the Deep South tends to be, at least when you look at federal elections, it tends to be more polarized. It's not just that Republicans win and they win by large margins. Racially polarized. It tends to be more racially polarized than we see elsewhere. What I mean by that is the exit polls, they used to, this kills me, they used to take exit polls in every state. So every 4 years we get a great readout on how every state was evolving. They don't do it anymore. They don't want to spend all the money. So we don't have Alabama exit polls from 2016 or 2012. We do have them from 2008. In 2008, it was Barack Obama against John McCain. And what I mean is, the black vote in Alabama was 93-5 for Obama, and the white vote was like 89-10 for McCain. And that level of racial polarization, if that's what drives a Senate election in Alabama, that could be a hard thing for any Democrat to overcome. That said, look, Roy Moore, even before these scandals, Roy Moore brought a lot of baggage to this race, a lot of baggage that a conventional Republican wouldn't bring to a race, and it showed. Roy Moore ran for office in Alabama 5 years ago for the office of Chief Justice. It's elected statewide. That's where he originally, he got to about 15 years ago, refused to take down a 10 Commandment display. More recently on the state Supreme Court, as a Chief Justice, he refused to enforce and uphold the gay marriage, got kicked off, got disciplined for that. So that history has made Roy Moore polarized even before this. When he ran for office in 2012 for Chief Justice, he got 51.5% of the vote. So, again, that's not federal office. Maybe it's different in a Senate race. Maybe people respond. But look, running for statewide office, a lot of people who vote Republican in Alabama for everything else looked at Roy Moore's name on their ballot and they couldn't do it. And that was before all of this. So we're seeing, it's a volatile situation. We have seen, I'd say, 2.5 polls come out over the last 5 days. I say half because the one that kicked all of this off was from the NRSC, which is the campaign arm of the Republicans in the Senate in Washington. It's Mitch McConnell, in other words. Mitch McConnell cannot stand Roy Moore, doesn't want him anywhere near the Senate. He's doing everything he can to stop Roy Moore and get him out of the race. So the NRSC leaked a poll to the media. They leaked the result. They wouldn't show all of the questions, they wouldn't show the methodology, and they wouldn't show who took the poll. And they leaked the result that said 12-point lead for the Democrat. So I've never seen this before. I've never seen a party's campaign committee leaking a poll to make its own candidate. This is the world we live in right now. But I took it skeptically because, look, they've got an incentive clearly to put out bad news for Roy Moore because they want him gone. They're being very shady about the policy. So I was dismissive of that when it came out alone. But then yesterday, Fox News, they sponsor a poll. It's a good poll. They got good, Democrat and Republican groups do it together. And their poll put Doug Jones, Democrat, up by 8 points. There was another one. I don't remember who took it. I think it came out last night. They put the margin at 3 for Doug Jones, for the Democrat. So I think it's clear at this point. There's been movement since these stories broke that suggests Doug Jones, Democrat, really, really could win this race. And again, we'll see what else comes out. But I think look, if a Democrat's ever going to win a Senate race in Alabama, it's got to be this one. It's got to be this one. So, and by the way, I was it's impossible to win in Alabama. And, remember what happened in this state? Remember what happened in this state when Ted Kennedy passed away? Special election. We say, look, Alabama voted for Donald Trump by 27 points. Hey, if this state voted for Barack Obama by a pretty similar margin in 2008, and the next thing you know, a year later, Scott Brown is beating Martha Coakley and going to the U.S. Senate. So weird things can happen. The short answer to the other one in terms of do they seat? Look, they have to seat him. The ruling from the Supreme Court is if Roy Moore wins the election, the Republicans in the Senate have to seat him. Then what do they do? The directive they're putting out there right now is the minute we seat him, we'll refer him to the Senate Ethics Committee. Senate Ethics Committee will he'll have to answer questions under oath. All these questions about did you do this to the yearbook? Were you with this? All those questions he's being asked now and not really answering, he has to answer under oath. That's the threat Republicans are putting out there right now. You will have to do that, Roy Moore, if you get elected and if you persist and try to get sworn into the Senate. Now, there's two ways to read that. Are they saying that now in the hopes that it will scare him off and get him to drop out of the race? Or do they really mean it? So if he wins and they have to seat him, do Republicans go forward with that? Or do they say, because I can imagine this, do they step back and they say, you know what? All right, we have deep problems here, but we respect the democratic process. The people of Alabama knew all of this. The people of Alabama made a judgment. And who are we to overturn the judgment of the people? I could totally see that happening too. So, and they will have some incentive to do that because think about this. If the Republicans take the other option here, if he gets elected and then they expel him, what do? They appoint a new senator. I mean, maybe it could be Sessions. It doesn't seem like he's interested. But say it's Mo Brooks, this random congressman from Huntsville. They put him in the seat. Well, there's immediately another special election. Well, guess who's going to run in that special election? Roy Moore. And what's Roy Moore's message going to be? You elected me, and those bleeps in Washington didn't respect it, so now send him a real message. And, I mean, it could trigger it. So I could absolutely see Republicans saying, you know what, we're just going to back off this. This seat's up in 2020. We'll try to address it then.
I actually have a comment on the analysis of Georgia 6. Keep in mind that Tom Price won the district by 23 points. So that would signify like a 19-point swing if you're looking at congressional candidates.
Right, so here's the issue there is, it wasn't a real campaign when Price, so Price the congressman, same day that Trump only won the district by a point, Tom Price the congressman won it in an absolute landslide. So you say, does that mean that the relatively close race in the special election signifies something? I mean, it's possible. The reason I don't think that's the case is twofold. One, Price was an incumbent. It was a non-campaign Democrat. Didn't raise any money, didn't have any presence in the media. The guy's name, his name is Stooksbury. There was an article in the Atlanta Journal-Constitution about 3 weeks before Election Day 2016 with the headline, "Does Stooksbury actually exist?" And I'm not even kidding, they couldn't find a picture of the guy. They had an address listed in his paperwork to get on the ballot, and they went to the address, they couldn't find any sign of him. So it was really just a name on the ballot with no real campaign, no money. So I think the Trump, to me, the Trump one in the district is the better measure of it, because I know everybody in that district was engaged in that race, and in the choice between Trump and the choice between Clinton. And I know if you're turned down to voting in a special election, and that's the only thing on the ballot, you're engaged in that choice. So I think it's a fairer measure, but I take the point.
Down in the second row there.
Thank you for an elegant presentation. You briefly alluded to what might happen in 2020, and then somewhere along the line you just kind of skipped over if he's on the ballot. So my question involves the elephant in the room. Without using the I word, do you think he's going to make it to 2020?
Well, who could break anything with Donald Trump, right? My assumption is, just try to read him from afar, and we all try to. If he chooses not to run for re-election, I can't imagine him, he will be told, and he will hear from all of his critics, every Democrat, everybody who's bashed him, will just be gloating. Oh, look, he knew he was going to lose, he backed that. And he doesn't seem like the kind of guy who can deal with that. And so I just think that's a guy who has to run, because he knows that it will be taken as an admission of defeat or weakness if he doesn't. So that's my reading, and I base that just trying to assess him from afar. What gives me pause, you don't want me to use the I word, if you all know we're talking about incumbency, you know. But look, my sense is that's not the threat to him running in 2020, only because to actually remove him from office, even if Democrats have a banner year next year, it's like when the Republicans impeached Bill Clinton. Look, you control the House, you could get impeachment through by 1 vote in the House. You need 2/3 in the Senate. And the Democrats are going to need, even if they get the Senate next year, it's not impossible to get the Senate, by the way, but even if they do, they would need all the Democrats. That would mean like folks like Heidi Heitkamp from North Dakota. Not even sure they could get that, plus like 15 Republicans. I can't see. So I don't think that's the threat. I think it's Steve Bannon has been making comments privately suggesting, and I'm not sure what his angle is on this, but he's been making comments suggesting he's not sure Trump's going to run. And look, he could have an agenda with that, I don't know. But it also raises the possibility to me. I'm trying to assess Trump from afar. Bannon's got a closer in read on Donald Trump, and that may indicate that he's got some insight into Trump's motivation and energy or whatever that I don't have, that we don't have, and then maybe there is some scenario where Trump chooses not to run. That's why it's more based on what I've heard from Bannon that I say that.
So, I read 538 articles, and one of the things they say is that the polls are usually off in the direction opposite what the pundits think it is. Happened in 2012, 2014, 2016, and the Virginia race here, and this year's UK and France elections. Do you believe that?
Well, my short answer is no. I only say that because I think I've seen so many, in the course of watching this stuff now and thinking back 20, 30 years, I've seen so many different rules about how the polls break that have been adjusted and contradicted. There were rules when I was starting out following this. There was a rule that if an incumbent was under 50% in the approval rating, the incumbent absolutely couldn't win re-election. And then I watched George W. Bush in 2004 turn around and do it. There were rules that if a race was, if you got to the end of a race and the incumbent wasn't, all of the late deciding voters are going to always break for the challenger in a race. That used to be a big rule. There was a race in New Jersey in 1993 where it seems like that happened, and for the Republican to get elected, and that became like a thing people repeated, and it's been blown up a bunch of times. So I think we can, There was, I remember, like, not to make it all New Jersey, I just used to cover it, that's why it's fresh on my mind. There was a rule that Democrats nationally, is driving me nuts, in 2009 when Chris Christie was running in New Jersey. They said, oh, there's a pattern in New Jersey, the Democratic share of the vote is always underestimated in the polls. You've got to add 4 points. Then again, you know, it went to a Christie win. So I look at it and I say, I don't know, those rules are only good until they're broken, and I've seen so many of them broken that I'm not, you know, I don't, we'll see. Maybe it's right the next time, but I'm skeptical.
Questions?
For everyone.
The question I come down to is, I was talking to a buddy of mine, and just before the election, he said that his sisters are there railing against Trump at the dining room table. And afterwards, the mom said, you know, your father's going to vote for Trump because you keep telling him he's stupid. And I'm wondering, you know, if Democrats just stop themselves from telling people they're stupid for voting for Trump or voting for the Republicans, because you're basically pushing people's back against the wall and they vote in spite of themselves.
I think it's a really interesting question. I think that when I talk about, you know, this being more about culture than about issue, I think it's exactly what that meshes with. And I'll tell you, like, and I think this is a debate. This is definitely a debate that's going on in the Democratic Party right now, where you've got sort of two schools of thought. Even use this as the map, I guess. But, you know, you look at the places that Trump won that made the difference in the election, and Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin. And you're talking states here that hadn't gone for a Republican since the 1980s. So these are states where something specific, something unique happened with Donald Trump, and it was what was really driving in those states. We talked about the class, non-college white. That's what it was in those states. Huge move towards Trump there, especially in those states. And there was this debate in the Democratic Party about, like, you know, is our future as a party winning back those voters? Or is our future as a party just ramping up places like Northern Virginia? And also, Richmond in particular has a large black population, just trying to drive up turnout among core Democratic groups. What is it? You know, there's the idea there's a message that can work here and drive numbers up in those places, or is it like win those votes back? And there's no resolution that I've seen in the Democratic Party on that, but in terms of what drove those voters in those states towards Trump in the end, what you're saying, that, without making a comment here whether it's fair or not, I do think there's a case to be made that the most significant moment of the 2016 campaign was when Hillary Clinton called Trump voters deplorable and irredeemable. And, you know, honest to God, it was her husband's rule. Bill Clinton's rule in the 1990s was you never attack the voters. And I can imagine folks in those places, those traditional Democratic places, that maybe they weren't ready to vote for Trump. But what you're describing, they think I'm stupid. I'm just considering it. I'm not sold on her. And she's telling, you know, I think that message, I liken that comment from her a lot to Mitt Romney and the 47% tape in 2012. And there's another parallel that I see there. After the 2012 election, Mitt Romney got caught on tape in 2012 saying 47% of the country, they're just takers. They just take our money, they don't produce anything, nothing we can, you know, contempt. 47% of the election, he ended up with 47% of the vote, by the way. At the time he said, he didn't come out, oh, I didn't mean it, out of context, all this. Okay. Election ends, and Dan Balls, who's a reporter with the Washington Post, one of the best in the business, goes and does an exit interview with Mitt Romney in December of 2012, and asks him about it. Romney defends it. And Romney's got his I remember reading this, Ball put this in his book. Romney's got his laptop, he's got all these charts he's showing about distribution of tax revenue. Romney believed it. There was something essential that was captured in that 47% remark from Mitt Romney about his attitude towards his fellow countrymen, about how he thought about them, about how he grouped them, about how he divided them. And for all his denials in the campaign, that seemed to be communicated pretty strongly. And where did Mitt Romney really struggle relative to how Republicans like George W. Bush had performed. Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin. He lost Wisconsin by double digits. He lost Michigan by double digits. He lost Wisconsin where Paul Ryan from Wisconsin was on the ticket. He didn't come close in Wisconsin. So I look at those voters, and I think of those are voters that went from Obama, anti-Romney, to Trump, anti-Clinton. And I wonder if they heard a similar message. And by the way, I got to say, if you read Hillary Clinton's book now or listen to her interviews, there's shades of Romney there in how she talks about those voters now. What she said then, maybe you think she's right, that's fine, it's honest, but I think there's a political, you can pay a political price for articulating something like that, and I think that's could be core to this.
So your slide about lost seats, about that presidency going back.
Yes.
Is that the net over the entire 8 years?
No, this is specifically the 2010 midterm. Democrats lost 63 House seats. 2006 midterm, Republicans lost 30. 94, Dems lost 54. 82, they lost just in that one election.
Then why don't you have H.W.?
So George H.W. Bush in the 1990 midterms, his approval rating was over 50%.
Okay.
So it was actually, and the net loss was like 6 or 7 seats. So this is when it gets down into that low 40s, 30s territory.
So you had mentioned like the question previous about Clinton's book, and in light of that, Donna Brazil's upcoming book, Wasserman Schultz and that whole fiasco, do you think the Democrats actually know what they're doing, or is this just kind of take it as you go and figure it out?
You know, well, is it know what they're doing, or, you know, can you get everybody on the same page strategically? Because I think there's just so many, you know, I'm offering you two different readings, two different sort of big picture readings of American politics. I mean, within the Democratic Party, there's 1,000 different readings of what happened in 2016, how do we avoid it happening in the future? The fundamental question is, do we go after the folks who went for Obama and went to Trump, or do we write them off and say, well, no, we don't want them, we want bigger turnout and stuff, you know, that's the fundamental question, but there's a million others. And I think it's not so much that they're, I don't view it as a question of competence or you know, political professionalism or anything as much as, I don't know how you get consensus. I don't know how in a party with interests that vary, you get consensus on those sort of big picture structural questions. I think that the silver lining for Democrats is, you can look at the history of some of these midterm elections. I remember I covered Congress in 2005 and 2006, and so it was the year Democrats made the gains. I remember in the spring of 2006, the attitude was, oh, these Democrats don't have their act together. They don't know what they're doing. They got no strategy. This is, you know, and it just, the gravity, for lack of a better term, the political gravity that's kind of created by a very, very unpopular president in a midterm election, it almost didn't matter what the Democrats' message was. It ended up being a wave election against the Republicans. And so, I mean, when all else fails, even if the Democrats can't get any consensus, I could still see them having a big midterm year in 2018. But then it opens the question, okay, that's one thing. In 2020, you got to pick one candidate, one face of your party, one person to go out there and oppose Donald Trump. That's when I think they'd have. That's when reaching consensus becomes an issue.
How about two more questions? First one right here in the back, and then first question. I have two. First question is, what is your opinion of the Democrats' chance of taking the Senate in 2 years? And the second one is, do you think that the Democrats are too nice when they are in controversies with the Republicans?
I think my answer are yes and no. Yes, do Democrats have a chance of taking the Senate? Well, contingent on winning Alabama. I think if Democrats win this Alabama special election, I can see, look, the deck is stacked against them in terms of how the Senate races lay out. They've got a ton of seats that they got to defend in states that Donald Trump won. There's only one Republican seat up in 2018, the Hillary Clinton one. That's in Nevada. Democrats have a real chance in Nevada. I think they have a real chance in Arizona. This is Jeff Flake, Republican seat. It's not a state that Clinton won, but she was close. She lost by 3. And Jeff Flake's not going to run for re-election. It's very possible Republicans are going to nominate a candidate that their base, a lot of their base likes a Trump-like candidate, but I'm not sure she's electable statewide, Kelly Ward. So I could absolutely see Democrats getting a gain in Arizona, a gain in Nevada, and then if they were to gain this Alabama seat, you got 3. And right now, that would get them there, except you've got all these seats in Trump states you have to defend. I don't know if Claire McCaskill's going to hang on in Missouri, for instance. Of all the Democratic seats up next year, that's the one I think is the shakiest, but it's not the only shaky one. So I think Democrats, they got to win Bama, they got to win those other 2. I think they got to find another win on the map somewhere in 2018. The most likely, pickoff that I can see, and this starts to be a reach, is Tennessee. Just looking at the nature of the state, you got to see how that race shakes out. I think they need a Tennessee or something like that, and they need to get lucky with their incumbents. I mean, somebody like McCaskill's probably got to find a way to survive. She did in 2012, but it was under some strange circumstances where the Republicans nominated this Todd Aiken, and Aiken made his comments about legitimate rape, if anybody remembers this. And that was what it took to get her reelected in 2012. So I put it this way. We were having this conversation 6 months ago. I'm saying there's basically no chance Democrats get the Senate in 2018. I think there's a chance now. I don't think it's a great chance, but the fact that we're having the conversation says something. In terms of are they too nice, I look at the energy that's being, call it the resistance. I think it's very aggressive, and maybe it's resulting in huge participation in these. I think in these special elections. I think it's about. I think what drives it is it's resistance, negativity towards Donald Trump. We can't believe this guy's the president. We don't like what it says about our country. That this guy. It's negative. I say it's a negative message. Hey, that's how politics works sometimes. But I think it's an essentially it's a negative energy that Donald Trump has kicked up among Democrats. In the same way that I think the anti-Trump resistance in this country, as I was saying earlier, I think you could make an argument that creates negative energy among Republicans too, and that's an exciting time to be following politics. So much negative energy, but maybe that's where we are.
So here's your segue. Who rises to the cream, to the top in the 2020 election for the Democrats? Who can galvanize
2020
the Democrats to get somebody who can, contrary to the visceral feeling that people had for Hillary, who can step up and be on the positive side of that?
So, boy, I love this question because there's so many. Joe Biden's in the news right now because he's got the new book out and he seems interested. And I go back and forth. Sometimes I think he's the only guy who could beat Trump. Sometimes I think he's the only guy who could lose to Trump. And it kind of depends on your reading of what happened in 2016. I mean, like I said, there's a reading that it was so specific to Hillary Clinton and so specific to the climate in 2016 that if you've any Democrat who's just not named Clinton and is just otherwise reasonably competent will take advantage of all this negative and win. So it's possible it's that simple for them. It's possible that it requires. The reason why I say sometimes I think Biden's the only one who could win, I start saying, well, it's the Scranton, Pennsylvania, Rust Belt. It's those Democrats in those states who turned on Hillary, who've been there for Obama. Maybe he could win them back. He'd have a unique way of reaching them. I also think Biden is I think this illustrates something big about politics and political narratives and how we overreact to things sometimes. The scenario that I play around with a lot is go back to 2014, 2015, right? Hillary Clinton wants to run in 2016. She's just finished being Secretary of State. People have totally forgotten this now, but when Hillary Clinton finished as Secretary of State, her favorable rating in polls was like 70%. She was like the most popular measure of poll. Republicans are saying nice things about her. She hadn't been in day-to-day politics. She's out of the Senate. Republicans, the popular message for the first Obama term was like, Republicans like to say, this way of taunting Obama, right? It'd be like, boy, it's too bad the Democrats didn't go with Clinton. She would have known what she was doing. This guy, they talked her up, and her popularity was 70%. And that whole movement, Ready for Hillary, in 2013 and 2014, was a response to those polls. They said, look at this. She's reached this elder statesperson place unbeatable, and they clear the field as much as they can for the primary, and nobody runs against her. And now, of course, we look at her as like, my God, she lost the unlosable election. She's a terrible candidate. So we've gone from there to there with her. Biden's going the opposite direction. Now think about Biden. At the end of 2014, again, forgotten, his unfavorable number, his disapproval number was higher than his approval and favorable number. He was an extremely unpopular vice president. The idea of Joe Biden, the human gaffe machine, the guy who can't finish a sentence without starting a controversy, like that was the image of Joe Biden. And so that's why Biden talks now, all this Biden should have run about. The reason Biden didn't run ultimately, I mean, he had a lot of stuff going on in his life, I understand. But ultimately, the reason Biden didn't run is Democrats weren't going to nominate him. Democrats in 2015 looked at Hillary Clinton and saw a winner. Democrats in 2015 looked at Biden and said, why run him when we have a winner in Hillary Clinton? He's risky. So then he doesn't run for president, and Hillary Clinton does run. And Republicans, and Trump especially, spend every day for a year and a half calling her crooked Hillary and lock her up and emails and all these things. And meanwhile, Biden doesn't run, and the press doesn't scrutinize him, and no Republican attacks him. And then Republicans do to him what they did with Clinton towards Obama. These Democrats, why did they run Biden? He knows how to talk to these voters. They start talking him up. And so by the end of the campaign, Joe Biden has like the highest favorable rating in politics. Hillary Clintons are in the gutter, and every Democrat and everybody in politics says, oh, it's so easy, just nominate Biden. You win Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, and that's it. And I'm like, well, you know what? I can see a scenario where they run Biden instead of Clinton, right? Biden's the guy who runs. Hillary's the one who stays in the sidelines. They praise Hillary Clinton for a year and a half. She's at 70% in the polls. They kill Biden for a year and a half. He loses to Trump, and everybody's sitting around now saying, I can't believe they didn't nominate Hillary. She would have won easily. So I mean, that's how these we think we have a good sense of who appeals to which voters and how. And I think of that. I'm like, I'm not sure. Look, 2020. I don't have the one candidate answer. I do have this. I think what's going to be unique about 2020 is the last time there was this much flux, chaos, uncertainty in politics, this question of like, do any of the rules apply? I think the last time we were in this place, anything analogous to this place, was after Watergate in 1974, 75, 76. And Richard Nixon leaves office, is almost impeached, and there was this question of, what is politics even about anymore? And Democrats had 17 candidates run for president in 1976. It was wide open. And of course, Hubert Humphrey kind of ran, I can't even remember, Hubert Humphrey kind of, we had big names out there. Jerry Brown was the governor of California still. He ran in 1976. Mo Udall, Frank Church, Sergeant Schreiber, we had all these candidates out there. And the one who emerged was the Jimmy Carter, the peanut farmer from Georgia who'd been selling Bibles in Boston 10 years earlier. No other circumstance, no other set of conditions could Jimmy Carter have emerged as the Democratic nominee for president, one-term former governor of Georgia, than as an answer to that moment. So simple, so plain, so honest after Watergate. So not Washington, peanut farmer, Plains, Georgia. The smile, that was his grinning teeth, that was like his campaign on all his signs and everything. Only set of conditions where that could have happened. And so I think something like that's going to happen in 2020 where you can already see it now. Any Democrat who has ever had a thought of, I'd like to be president, I'd like to run, I think I could be president, they look at Donald Trump, they look at politics right now, and they say, there is no reason not to take a shot right now. Because this is when all the rules are broken. This is when, anything is possible. So I think you're going to have a field as large as 1976, maybe larger. I mean, Seth Moulton, second-term congressman from this state, is asking, look at this. So he wins the UMass Lowell caucus. There we go. That's first delegate. You've got, Mitch Landrieu, the mayor of New Orleans. You've got mayor. You're going to have a massive field, and I don't have any. This is what I'm trying to figure out. I don't know if there's an answer to this, but who's the Jimmy Carter in this scenario? Who's the unique answer to this moment? And to all of the sort of questions and challenges posed by Donald Trump, who's the unique answer to that who couldn't win under any circumstances? And I think everybody in this room probably has a different opinion, and that's why it's going to be such a fun race to follow. So.
What a great way to end the talk. Thanks. On behalf of the Chancellor and everyone here at UMass Lowell, a small token of our appreciation. And I think we might ask him back after his new book comes out next year. What do you think?